Well, thank you so much for coming. And by way of early introduction, thank you for the so many emails and questions and visits to my drop-in surgeries, visits to my bookable surgeries. There's no doubt that South Northamptonshire is very engaged with the issue of Brexit. And there's also no doubt that it's pretty much 52-48 from the responses I get. I'd say that there's a marginal support for leaving the EU. So I think what I want to first of all say is that I am very conscious that we're leaving the EU, and for many people in this room and in my constituency, that is not what they want to happen. So the other thing I want to say to you is thank you for respecting the decision. And I know that for most people who write to me, they absolutely do respect the decision, and they just want us to get on with it. And the reason for the meeting this evening is to be very frank with you and to try and give you my best overview of where we're up to. But most important of all is to hear from you, hear your thoughts, views and ideas so that I can feed them back directly into Cabinet. You'll realise that there are no easy answers, no easy solutions. It's important that you know what's going on, but also to get your opportunity to put in your voice. So we need to reach a conclusion and then we need to move on. The country is divided, and I think you've seen how divided Parliament is. We do need to move on. All political parties are divided. It's causing great difficulty. So roll on the 29th of March as far as I'm concerned. At this point, I will be very clear. I am and will be a passionate Brexiteer. I genuinely believe that our future is so much brighter once we leave the European Union. And I have to be absolutely clear about that. I'm delighted with the decision we've taken, and there's nothing that's going on that makes me doubt that decision or think we should delay, have a second referendum, overturn the decision, even avoid leaving on the 29th of March for some kind of something will turn up later. That is my personal view. I have to be completely clear about that. But I do want to give you a proper overview. And with that in mind, I shall now read it to you so that I'm not tempted to colour it with my own opinions. So I think what we saw last week in Parliament with the meaningful vote, in fact almost 2 weeks ago now, was the Commons making very clear what it doesn't want. And the problem that we have in Parliament is that Parliament isn't making clear what it does want. That night we saw lots of MPs expressing very real concerns with the Prime Minister's proposed deal. But having talked to a lot of colleagues across the House, and whilst you see us all yelling at each other in the chamber, in fact, there are many cross-party friendships and alliances. And I've talked to people from the Labour Party, the DUP, the Scottish Nationalists, of course, from the European Research Group on my own side, the Conservative Party, and to lots of Conservatives who are Remainers, who I fundamentally disagree with, but it's important to hear their views. And actually, my assessment from talking to people is that we are not very far away from agreeing a deal. And the big issue is that there are very particular parts of the deal that individual MPs are concerned about. And if we could sort those, we would actually then be able to proceed through the meaningful vote and then to implement the legislation. So what the Prime Minister is trying flat out to do, and I'm helping her to achieve, is to find out exactly what's needed to secure the backing of MPs while still being consistent with the result of the referendum and, of course, leaving the European Union. So MPs have to say what they do want and stop saying what they don't want. So to reassure people, those of you who want reassurance, I don't think there's any majority in Parliament for staying in the EU. Genuinely don't think that's the case. I also don't think that there's any majority for a second referendum. And just to be clear, either would be a betrayal of the referendum. So even if you didn't vote to leave, I think everyone can understand that when there is a majority for something, you do it. You don't tell people to go back to the drawing board, they got it wrong, they need to do it again, you need to delay it, and so on and so on. So I genuinely hope that we can agree on that. I'm sure we probably can't, but I'm laying my views on the table. There is no doubt that the next few days are going to be challenging, and it won't be an easy thing to get the Prime Minister's deal over the line in the House of Commons. So I do agree with her. It's right that she's listening to MPs, and it's a great shame that Jeremy Corbyn won't talk to her when absolutely everybody else is willing to, and he seems willing to talk to anybody else but her. So on Tuesday, next week, Tuesday the 29th of January, subject to the agreement of the Commons, so they first of all have to vote to agree the terms of the discussion, we will then have a full day's debate on the next steps. And the motion that's before the House, which is currently a neutral motion, that the House has agreed the Prime Minister's presentation of the next step. So it's a neutral motion. But that motion is amendable. And we're already seeing lots of different amendments going down, including delaying Brexit, including removing the backstop from the entire deal, and other amendments as well. And there'll be more over the weekend. So we can expect to see lots of amendments proposed. MPs will therefore be putting forward all sorts of different ideas. Now, under parliamentary procedures, some of them will not be selectable. And going back to the big row a couple of weeks ago where the Speaker chose an unselectable, unamendable amendment, that's what the argument's been about, is that there are certain parliamentary procedures that you cannot undermine without changing the conventions of the House. And this is an incredibly important point, and I'm actually writing in the Sunday Telegraph about this, because whilst it sort of sounds very geeky, it's parliamentary procedures, the convention for hundreds of years is that the government, the people who form the government, the people who carry the majority at a general election where they were democratically voted for, regardless of coalitions and confidence and supply motions, the people who form the government will put forward the legislation, Parliament will scrutinise it, Parliament will amend it, Parliament will accept it or reject it. But what these amendments are seeking to do is to legislate, is to force government to legislate, and that is to overturn centuries of the way Parliament runs. So it's a very significant risk to the way our democracy works. And that, for me, as Leader of the Commons, is a very considerable concern. So the government is working hard to see what deal will secure the support of the House. And that, of course, has to be something that we can then negotiate with the European Union, because obviously, by definition, it has to be agreed by both sides. But to be very clear, the legal default position is that if the Commons fails to agree a deal, then we will leave on March the 29th without one. That is the date that's in the legislation. That is what will happen. That's the legal default position, unless the House decides to vote for something else. And as I say, next Tuesday is a big day, fraught with all sorts of potential problems. But ultimately, if the House doesn't vote for a deal or for something else, we leave without a deal on March the 29th. And so whilst there is no doubt in my mind we would survive and thrive if we had a no-deal Brexit, there's also no doubt in my mind it would not be a good idea either for us or the European Union. What we do need is to have in place agreements amongst ourselves, preparation at our end and at their end to be able to deal with no deal. And so the preparations are very much underway. Across government, there are 10,000 civil servants working on leaving the EU, with around another 5,000 being brought in for particular specialisations. We've now published over 100 technical notices to help businesses and people prepare, from things like what to do if there's no deal, if you want to go and drive across Europe, what do you do with your driving licence, if you want to take a pet on holiday, all sorts of things like that. And also, what do businesses need to do with customs declaration forms and so on. And you might say, why didn't we have this a year ago? And the answer is, as you will fully appreciate, is that we are seeking to minimise the amounts of disruption in the event of no deal. And as you will no doubt have seen also in the press, it's quite clear that the European Union member states are also starting to think, actually, we probably want to make these things easier rather than harder. And it was always going to go to the wire. So I would urge all of you, if you haven't had a look yet, to look at the gov.uk website and see some of these practical and technical pieces of advice on what to do and by when, if it looks like there's no deal. And certainly, I suspect that we will continue to prepare for no deal right until the very end. So in addition, we've announced 10 new aviation agreements, including with the US and Canada, that guarantee existing routes. We've set out new passport rules for people travelling to many European countries. We've made renewing passports as easy as possible. There's no doubt you'll still be able to travel easily in and around, to and from the EU in the event of no deal. We've absolutely stress tested freight movements at Dover. We've had the Calais President Chairman saying that that scaremongering about queues is simply not true, that they will put measures in place as well. All of these things are incredibly important. They're not scaremongering. They are sensible preparations. But no deal is not in anyone's interests. It would harm the UK's and the EU's economies in the short term. So to avoid that, what we need is for the House of Commons to resolve the issue of the Prime Minister's deal. And to do that, I think we need to resolve the issue of the backstop. So in order to get the backstop removed or time limited, we have to play hardball with the European Union. And I've actually just today put that out on the press, that we really do need the EU to understand, because they seem to still be questioning what the problem is when it's absolutely clear to everybody who's anything to do with politics that the problem is the backstop. We don't want a hard border. Ireland doesn't want a hard border. So it's encouraging to read, as some of you will have done, that, for example, the Polish Foreign Minister has suggested that a backstop could be time limited. That would, of course, alleviate concerns and enable us to get on to the Prime Minister's deal and then to the legislation. So if we can pass the meaningful vote that means the Prime Minister's deal goes through, we will then be introducing the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. In my opinion, we still have time, even now, to get that legislation through the Commons and the Lords, so that we leave on the 29th of March, leaving the European Union, leaving the single market, the customs union, the common fisheries policy, the common agricultural policy, so that we can have a new international trade policy of our own. We can start to build new relationships around the world whilst retaining the strength of our relationships with non-tariff barriers minimised and zero tariffs with our EU friends and neighbours. That, in my opinion, is what is in the best interests of the United Kingdom and of the European Union, and I will be spending all of my time trying to make sure that that happens. Thank you very much.